The monarchy, a symbol of God-ordained power, the ruling class, high nobility, and madness for centuries. Whether leading a country at war, pining for a secession line, or fighting off usurps, the pressure of being sovereign was forever extraordinarily high. Many rulers would decline mentally, turning to cruelty and sadism in murdering relatives, engaging in costly failed wars, and steadily losing mental faculties. Yet, was there a somewhat embarrassing STI behind many of these mad monarchs? Be it Henry VIII's many murdered wives, Caligula making a horse a minister, or Ivan the Terrible killing his own son. Welcome to History on Fleek. Today we examine royals who had syphilis and went mad. Syphilis is a sexually transmitted disease that contains symptoms of different severity. Some symptoms are unpleasant but not uncommon in their illnesses: fever symptoms, muscle aches, sore throats, and lymph nodes. However, syphilis, if left untreated, can lead to hugely debilitating manners like seizures, memory issues, personality changes, and even dementia. In the Middle Ages, syphilis was treated in the most rudimentary fashion, usually giving the patient mercury as a cure. As you might be able to imagine, this could likely make the patient sicker rather than well. Mentioned multiple times in the works of William Shakespeare, Cupid's disease was something to fear and not entirely understood in Middle history. Upon French King Charles VIII's invasion of Italy in 1494, both French and Italian armies were ravaged by the disease. When the French soldiers deployed in Africa, they spread the disease further. It was labeled the French disease. The French called it the Italian disease. In the Arab world, it was known as the Christian disease. The Middle Ages had a syphilis problem, and it would bother monarchs for centuries to come. A famous monarch and something of a famous tyrant to boot, Henry VIII, by many Tudor accounts, suffered from syphilis. His reign as King of England is a tale of two Henrys, if you will. At the start of his reign and as a younger man, Henry VIII is regularly depicted as a picture of health, a lover of the arts and music, a prodigious hunter, and most importantly, a fair and committed sovereign. Yet the latter half of his reign is quite the opposite, and no doubt, what he is most famous for. In his later years, Henry gained a huge amount of weight through binging, waged exorbitant wars, and frankly, got rather murderous with his wives. For Henry VIII, producing a male heir was of utmost import, and an issue that caused him considerable woe. However, the king's medical health may have been a severe underlying factor. Among his many medical ailments in later life, including painful ulcers all over his body and chronic bone infection that left walking painful, syphilis has been theorized by many as one of the contributing factors to the unhinged behavior in his later reign. Among one of the most famous monarchs to have lost their minds with a track record of syphilis is Ivan the Terrible. Born in 1533, Ivan never had much of a choice in life, being bestowed his lineage at the age of 3. Establishing the tsardom when he was 16, Ivan IV oversaw a huge transformation of Russia as a state and nation, with many of his agrarian reforms developing Russia from a medieval state into an empire. However, you don't get a name like Ivan the Terrible for sending out subpar Christmas cards. Even the most generous of commentators have declared Ivan's personality as either complex or a picture of mental illness, long before such a perspective existed. Ultimately, Ivan was not a particularly successful ruler. His reign did oversee major changes in Russia, but even his agrarian reforms were of immense expense to the general public. His military campaigns were a disaster and hugely costly to the Russian economy, an economy he inherited in poor shape and left no better. Yet it was Ivan's treatment of his own for which he would gain his infamous title. In a precursor to the Great Purge of Stalin, Ivan would have his own purge of the nobility at the time of the Oprichnina. He was notorious for pangs of rage and paranoia that only grew in frequency the older he grew. It was in such a rage, Ivan murdered his own son and heir. Some sources also declared he may have also killed his heir's unborn child. So where does syphilis fit into all of this? Following the exhumation of his remains, the body of Ivan the Terrible was practically flooded with mercury. Now, it can't be said for certain what was more likely to have muddled his executive function, the syphilis or the mercury, but we can say for sure the 16th century treatment for syphilis was mercury. What do you think? STI guy turned mad, or mad guy with the misfortune of an STI? You decide. Out of all the monarchs that caught Cupid's disease, a little-known revolutionary named Rudolph II likely passed your attention. Ruler of the Holy Roman Empire from 1576 to 1612, Rudolph II was something of an eccentric with a rule divided firmly between ineffectual and iconoclast. The 30 Years' War, by many accounts, could have been avoided under another ruler, but not Rudolph. However, in departments, middle period rulers were not so famed for what Rudolph II seemingly excelled. His beliefs in the occult, astronomy, and burgeoning sciences have been noted as the precursor in the coming scientific revolution. Rudolph was a collector of many things, predominantly art, for which he was a major patron of the time. Yet he was famed for having a castle in Prague akin to a modern-day safari. Kept in his castle were lions, tigers, dodos, and even an orangutan. As ruler of the Holy Roman Empire, Rudolph was an enigma to his people. He could withdraw for months at a time and speak inaudibly. Often, Rudolph was in spells of melancholy that would render him nearly lifeless. Historic sources have revealed that Rudolph was infected with syphilis as a young man, the disease staying with him throughout his lifetime. Many have pointed retrospectively to this being an underlying factor of his many mental troubles. Was an STI the story behind this one-of-a-kind and individual ruler in Roman times? The name is likely one you've heard before, a name that is pretty much a place name in itself. In fact, if you look up Mad King in some dictionaries, all you find is a picture of Caligula. The third emperor of Rome, Caligula ruled for just 4 years, but his impact was monumental. Many accounts describe Caligula as insane, and there is a fair trunk of evidence to back this charge. Among some absolutely appalling acts of physical cruelty and outright sadism, Caligula could make the most ludicrous of demands upon his subjects. Once, Caligula ordered a 2-mile floating bridge to be constructed just so he could ride his horse along it. One time, he ordered soldiers to fill their helmets with seashells in an effort to plunder the sea. He is also said to have banned goats in his presence and gone out of his way to practice scary faces to terrify his underlings. And last but not least, he did attempt to promote a horse to high office. Not a gag, he really wanted to, really meant that. Ultimately though, many Roman sources paint a grim picture of Caligula. Retrospect has come to see, no doubt a despot, but also a wholly unwell human. Among the supposed illnesses of the mad young Caligula were encephalitis, meningitis, and epilepsy. And some historians believe his extreme moods may be down to hyperthyroidism. Though some would point to perhaps the most likely of ongoing afflictions for this sexually debauched young emperor, syphilis. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.